What do we do about the latest spate of mass killings in California, which has some of the country's strictest gun control laws? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the principled case for the libertarian philosophy in the context of the burning issues of the day. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners as always.
Yeah, well, Richard, one of the burning issues of the day, of course, is gun control. It's been like that ever since we established FFF in 1989. It never leaves the agenda. People are always talking about it. And of course, in the context of this latest spate of mass killings in California, you had a mass killing at a ballroom in which I think it was 11 people got murdered and 9 people got injured. But it wasn't the only mass killing in California. Interestingly enough, in the past 8 days, 25 people were killed in 4 separate mass shootings. And they define a mass shooting as one in which at least 4 people are injured. This included a mass killing up at Half Moon Bay, California. And the one that took place around LA was a mass killing that took place in a ballroom of all things. That people were just ballroom dancing, and the killer went in there and just started shooting it up. And that's not real clear exactly yet what was going on or what kind of weapon he was using. But I mean, we've seen this time and time again. In fact, I could be wrong, but I vaguely recall a statistic saying that on average, there's a mass killing in the United States every day of the year. Now, this includes, of course, the fact that California has among the strictest gun control laws in the country. So these mass killings have taken place here in California in the context of a very, very strict gun control regimen, one of the strictest in the country. Let me read you from the Washington Post what they have in California. I'm quoting the Washington Post. State lawmakers have imposed mandatory waiting periods on the purchase of firearms. They have banned military-style assault rifles, one of only 8 states, along with D.C., to do so. The state has a red flag law that allows guns to be seized from people believed to be a threat. And California voters overwhelmingly approved a limit on the number of bullets allowed in a gun's magazine. Now, again, we don't know what exactly the guns that were used in the ballroom shooting, I think, or even in the other shootings. But the point is that here you've got a state where it has mandatory gun control laws, very strict ones, and you still have mass killings. Now, the gun control crowd obviously doesn't know how to deal with this. I mean, they enact these really strict gun control measures, and yet here are these mass killings. So, not surprisingly, they're blaming it on guns in America, where the guns can be purchased in other states and be brought in to California, which is really, to me, an implicit call for border controls, just like we have on the southern border. Border guards and check everybody coming into the state. Look in their trunks, make sure they're not smuggling guns in. But before we get to really the root of this thing, is why does America have so much violence in it? We can discuss that subject later in the show, and it's obviously a critically important subject. Yeah, I want to point out something important here, that from what I can tell, there was nobody in this ballroom firing back at this guy. Nobody. And there's a simple reason for that. California's strict gun control laws. In other words, what the gun control purports to do is to keep people from having guns to go shoot people. But obviously that doesn't work. So what it effectively does is it denies people the right to defend themselves. because nobody wants to get caught violating California's gun control laws. You get caught and you get convicted of a felony and you get sent up to the penitentiary for many years of your life. So people don't want to take that chance. It's a rational decision. So really what these gun control measures is they disarm people. They make sure that the victims are unable to defend themselves. If somebody had a weapon there in this ballroom, just a small pistol in their pockets or in their coat, they could have started firing back at this guy and taking him out before he could do too much damage. That's not permitted. And it's what I've always argued is that people that are mass killers have a tendency to target people in gun-free zones. I don't think it's a surprise that this type of shooting takes place in California as compared to Texas. I mean, if you go to a ballroom in Texas and you start shooting people up, it's a virtual certainty that some of those ballroom dancers are going to pull out a gun and fire back. Now, of course, there was the big mass killing at the public school in Uvalde, but that again was a gun-free zone. People are not permitted to have guns in these schools, and so therefore they're not able to defend themselves. But you go into let's say a gun store in Texas, or those big gun sales where they have convention centers filled with gun purveyors and stuff. There's not a mass killer that's going to go in there and start shooting people up. He'd be stupid. He's always going to select the gun-free zones. And California, as a state, is really a gun-free zone. And that's why it's so easy to go in there and start killing people. So that's my take on this, Richard. We've gone over this time and time again over the 33-year history of FFF. Whenever you have these mass killings, the reaction's the same: gun control, gun control, gun control. But it's obvious that in this case, their little gun control measures actually contributed to the problem. What do you think?
If one is going to be a mass shooter like this, how do you know who has a firearm on them wherever this public place is? If people have the right to keep and bear arms, and either have an open carry or even a concealed carry. No one, even if someone ends up or already is planning ahead to kill themselves through following such a mass shooting, if your goal is to try to harm others for whatever deranged reason you have, what's the point of being put in a position where someone else kills you before you've had your chance to have your delusion and kill a bunch of other people before you kill yourself? So you're absolutely right. The fact is that it's in the irrational motives and intentions of these people to take out a variety of people who they have, however delusionally, a grievance against before they take their own life or get into a confrontation with the police, where it's sort of suicide by cop, as they sometimes say. The only way to preclude this, contrary to the cliches that the other sides present, is to have an armed citizenry. Everybody was aghast when, after these shootings at these schools recently, and these little kids killed in that school in Texas, where the police themselves hesitated going in. You hire people to be in law enforcement to protect life and property, and the policemen themselves don't want to put themselves in harm's way. Yeah, if you don't want to bear the risk of the job description, don't have the job. But separate from that, what if some of the school administrators, or if they had one or two security guards on the premises who had been armed and ready to use these things through proper safe training? The fact is, these shootings wouldn't occur. These shootings would not occur in these places like schools that particularly horrify people. Of course, it is horrifying when you have clusters of parents who see their own children dead. Who even imagines these things are easily gets over it? But the problem is not the fact that the shooters have guns, but the fact that those others who are the victims or the potential victims have no way of protecting themselves until this attitude is reversed. You see, what is the end game? What are they? All guns should be banned. Only the police and the military should have arms. But the fact is that presumes that you're going to be able to undermine and prevent the black market in firearms. We've had over a century of a war on drugs. Has it done away with drugs? And that's with the full power of the police and sometimes the military in interdiction. It does not function. New York City has extremely strong gun laws, as well as California now, as you were pointing out. You have the Sullivan's Act in New York State. Has it prevented shootings, the gang warfare, the drive-bys? No. Even if you say we're going to ban all guns in the United States, I mean, we banned alcohol, but it didn't mean that alcohol couldn't be imported illegally from other areas, land, sea, and air, that enabled bootlegging to go on and led to the elimination of the Prohibition Amendment. Unless you're going to try to figure out a way to ban armaments worldwide, I'm just talking conceptually here, you don't have a way of handling this problem. You can't. So what you end up with is disarming the potential victims, or leaving a situation in which domestically you do your best to leave everyone unarmed, not only against private attacks, but against their own government. I mean, when Assad in Syria began putting down this resistance to his regime several years ago, what was the main problem? Those people who wanted to rise up against his dictatorship were poorly or not unarmed. So what did the United States and these other governments start doing? They immediately started shipping armaments to civilian resistance groups. So it's okay for the US government to arm people in other countries to potentially oppose their own government. But it's viewed as by these people to be appropriately against law in the United States, even to have an armament to protect yourself against a private aggressor.
Yeah, and if you look, for example, at Switzerland, I mean, the Swiss people are armed to the teeth. Everybody's got assault rifles in their homes. Everybody's ready in case the country's ever invaded. You don't see mass killings there on a regular basis. In fact, you don't see mass killings there on any basis. If too many guns in the hands of private individuals was the cause of mass violence, Switzerland would be having all these mass killings too, but they don't. So there's obviously something different about the United States. And that's the thing that we have to explore, that we can talk about these killings as they occur and talk about the right of self-defense and so forth, but it still doesn't get to the root of the problem. Why are there all these mass killings here? And your point is a good one. I mean, America's awash in guns. It has been since its inception. I read somewhere that there are an estimated 400 million guns in private hands. Well, now, if they really want a gun-free society, that's going to be quite a quest, Richard, to go out and confiscate or buy 400 million guns. You know, I mean, but that's really their dream, their pipe dream, to be like Cuba, where everybody's disarmed. And of course, everybody's very obedient and compliant because not everyone's disarmed. The state is very armed in Cuba, but the citizenry is disarmed. And that's really the dream of the gun control crowd here in the United States, because you see, the idea is that if they disarm everybody, they get all these 400 weapons into Fort Knox, that now there won't be any more killings by guns. But it is such a ludicrous notion, as you suggested. I mean, how are they going to get 400 million guns into Fort Knox? How are they going to get everybody to surrender these guns? And then even if they do, they've got the black market to contend with. That a mass murderer, what prevents him from buying a gun on the black market, just like he buys drugs? And I'm glad you brought up prohibition, because I think that one of the causes of all this violence is the drug war itself. I mean, certainly it has brought untold violence to Mexican society. In Mexico, there's well over 100,000 people who have been killed, not because of drugs, but because of the drug war. And so the problem is magnified there. But over here in the United States, you've got the gang wars and the turf battles and so forth. And I'm not suggesting that this is what happened in the ballroom. There's something else going on there, obviously. But there's no question that the drug war has contributed to this culture of violence in America. But if we want to take it to a deeper level, I think the real reason is because the federal government has turned our country into a purveyor of violence. We have a culture of violence thanks to the federal government. You know, we just ended up celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday with Martin Luther King Day, and we often forget what King pointed out about the federal government and why he was considered such a threat to national security. He was opposing the Vietnam War, and he called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And who can dispute that? Who is a greater purveyor of violence than the U.S. government? And that when we look at, for example, the Vietnam War, they killed over 1 million Vietnamese people with their invasion there. They sacrificed 58,000 American men plus of yours and my generation, Richard, for nothing. And this is what King was referring to, this great purveyor of violence in the U.S. government. We just finished with a 20-year war in Afghanistan where they killed untold numbers of Afghan people. I would estimate that 99% of the people they killed in Afghanistan had absolutely nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks. And then the same in Iraq. They attacked Iraq, a country that had never attacked the United States. They killed untold numbers of people. And my point is that they don't care how many people they kill. The value of human life in foreign affairs is nothing. It bears no value at all in the eyes of the U.S. national security establishment, this great purveyor of violence. In Iraq, when they had the sanctions on Iraq, they were killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children with these sanctions. They didn't care. Now, everyone gets angry and outraged, of course, when several children are killed at a public school, you know, whether Shady Hook or Uvalde, and rightly so. I mean, it's just unnatural to see children getting killed. But when they were killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children, they didn't care. It was just total indifference. When Madeleine Albright, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, was asked whether the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions was worth it, she said, "Oh, yeah, it's worth it." And she was referring to regime change in Iraq. How can the deaths of innocent children be worth such a thing? So when you have this mindset that is inculcated in the American people that the value of human life is worthless when it comes to foreigners, how can they expect that that's not going to have an effect on American society? But that's always been the rationale, that as long as the killings are taking place over there, and the number of American troops that are dying is minimal, don't worry about it. Everything's fine over here. People go to work and they go on their vacations and they go about their normal lives. I don't think that's possible. I think when you are the world's greatest purveyor of violence in the world, that is ultimately going to seep into the consciences and consciousness of the American people. And my rationale is this, that there are always off-kilter people in a society. But when you've got a normally functioning society where the government's not the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, those off-kilter people just go about living their lives. They're a little weird. You see them walking the streets and they act weird and stuff, but everybody just leaves them alone or helps them out. But there's no violence created there. I think that the world's greatest purveyor of violence is triggering something in these off-kilter people that is causing them to have the same mindset that, oh, if the government doesn't value human life overseas, why should I value life over here? Now, granted, people would say, wait a minute, why is he not recognizing that American life is more valuable, more important than foreign life? Well, because he's off kilter. He's not recognizing the distinction. He's seeing his government killing all these massive people, masses of people, mass murders, really, all over the world, is the world's greatest purveyor of violence, as King pointed out. He thinks, I'll just do the same thing over here. And so my solution to all this, Richard, is if you want to get rid of this mass killings, you've got to restore a peaceful, harmonious society. Get rid of the drug war and get rid of this part of the government that is the world's greatest purveyor of violence in the world.
I just want to sort of reemphasize or reiterate something. Just last night, I was watching an episode of a TV show called FBI. And the theme of that episode was that they've uncovered a terrorist cell made up of people from Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula. And they capture one of the terrorists. They're interrogating them, trying to foil what is viewed as going to be some attack. And it's a young lady, and she basically says, the attack will be made regardless of what you try to do to me. And I'm glad you have armed the Saudis, who have been raining war and destruction on my people, killing children and ruining my society. It is time that you suffered the same consequences. Now, let us be clear. Two wrongs don't make a right. And merely because A kills B does not mean that the relatives of B can be justified either legally or morally in proceeding to attack and kill the relatives of A. But by the fact that the United States, either directly itself or indirectly by arming its proxy allies in these conflicts, ends up bringing about the death and destruction of people who view themselves as or have been innocent victims, that sends up urges for revenge. So you can't be too surprised that some people, again, with two wrongs not making a right, will feel that they want revenge for injustices done to them and to their relatives and families. But besides that, you were emphasizing these elements of foreign intervention and the militarism that goes on. I want to bring out another element of this bumper, Jacob, and that is what it goes on domestically. I mean, the very people who say that they would like to see all firearms taken out of the hands of private citizens imply that they want the firearms to exist only in the hands of government agents, the police. Yet it is very often these very same people who then are aghast and shocked and condemnatory when policemen have used their power of lethal force against innocent civilians, such as the white cop who was caught on video emptying his revolver into the back of an unarmed black man running away. Racist, arbitrary, unjustified use of force. Why should you be surprised that this sometimes happens when even those in the police force who act rogue can act rogue because they are convinced that those who they might be inappropriately stopping, violating, attempt to arrest have no means of self-defense. This sets up a situation in which you take away the ability to protect themselves, not only against aggressive private citizens, the burglar, the rapist, the nut murderer, like we were talking about in these mass shootings earlier, but even the situation in which a rogue policeman, outside of the legitimate uses of defense force in his role as a policeman, would now proceed to be attacking innocent people, and that innocent person has no way of defending himself, which in principle, I would presume a court of law would consider eventually justifiable if a policeman has just randomly or arbitrarily or unjustifiably started shooting people. Certainly a bystander or a victim has a right to defend themselves even against a policeman in that case if the evidence were to suggest that. But that takes away all ability for people to do this at all. You leave it in the hands of those who are in political power and their agents. And there are reasons why the founding fathers felt that the right to bear arms was not only because the guy next to you could be a bandit or a thief or a murderer, but ultimately you need to have the means of protecting yourself against your own government if it becomes the oppressor rather than the protector.
Yeah, that's really a critically important point. And interestingly enough, blacks are buying guns in ever increasing numbers. I mean, they're breaking all kinds of records where blacks are obviously feeling the danger, not only from other people, these mass killers, but also from the cops that are oftentimes abuse their power and kill blacks, for example, in the name of the war on drugs. And your movie example is very interesting to me too, because sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. I went and researched the guy who was responsible for the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. Several years ago, I was intrigued by this guy. His name was Ramzi Youssef. When he appeared before the federal judge for sentencing, for doing this, the judge naturally condemned him. You're a bad person. You don't really follow the laws of Allah and whatever. You're just you're an anti-God, anti-religious, violent terrorist. Well, this guy's response was very interesting, Richard. He said, you can call me a terrorist if you like, but it is you people who are the butchers. And he pointed to the fact that they were killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children as part of their sanctions. Well, this judge obviously could not comprehend such a thing, that this is the world's greatest purveyor of violence. This is what Martin Luther King was able to do. This is why they hated King, because King was speaking the truth. This is why they hate anybody who speaks the truth, like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden. You're not supposed to speak the truth about the empire. There was another guy who, a Pakistani guy also, that went and shot CIA agents over there driving into CIA headquarters. This was in 93 as well. And they caught him and they brought him back for trial. He said the same thing. They gave him the death penalty. He said, look what you're doing to people over here. Well, they don't want to hear that. The judges didn't want to hear it. The prosecutors don't want to hear it. When Ron Paul was in that famous debate in the Republican Party, he said, the reason they came over here on 9/11 was because we, meaning the government, was over there killing people over there. I mean, the mainstream media went ballistic. The audience went ballistic. I mean, you're not supposed to say such a thing. And ironically, that's when Ron's campaign took off, because there was a large number of Americans that knew he was telling the truth. And your point, Richard, about ultimately you have the right to keep and bear arms to protect yourself from a horrific, tyrannical government is so right on. This is why the founders really enacted the Second Amendment, not to protect yourself from other murderers and thieves and not to shoot deer, but to protect yourself from your own government. And those that say, oh, our government would never do such a thing. Are you kidding me? This is a government, especially the national security state government, that installs dictatorial regimes into power. One of the most famous is their installation of Augusto Pinochet and their celebration of him, because he was bringing the Chicago boys in and so forth. Never mind that he rounded up 60,000 innocent people, killed or disappeared 3,000 of them, tortured and raped the other 57,000 or so, or his goons did. And it's not a far cry from a government that installs that kind of regime and a government that then becomes that regime in the interest of national security during some presumed crisis.
Yeah, there's the old adage, the friend of my enemy is my enemy. So even if the United States is not directly undertaking such military interventions with the violence connected with them, when the United States arms, supports, helps indirectly to defend such violent and tyrannical regimes, why should we be surprised that those that foreign government is oppressing within its own territorial jurisdiction comes to view the United States as an accomplice who is as guilty as their own government?
Yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia comes to mind. I mean, to me, that's a perfect example of that type of thing. Even the CIA itself concluded that the prince over there had orchestrated the murder of Khashoggi. And here, despite that, the U.S. government continues to flood this tyrannical regime with armaments. And they're saying that could never happen here in the United States. Come on, give me a break. All right, Richard, we're out of time. Thanks for the great discussion. I really enjoyed this particular show with you, Richard. And if you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our daily FFF Daily, which we strive to make the best libertarian commentary page on the internet. Subscribe to our monthly journal. And if you like our work, become a donor to the Future of Freedom Foundation. Richard, I greatly enjoyed the visit. Thank you all for tuning in, and look forward to talking to you next week, Richard.
Until next time, you take care.